Today, we will be investigating two teens who believed a fictional character told them to kill, a cheerleader who buried her own baby in the backyard, and a child who killed his family for the sake of money.
Came upon a 12-year-old female. She appears to be what? Correct.
So many people have followed this story for so long, including us, and this is the first time that Peyton Leitner is talking. Do you remember leaving the park to go to the woods?
This is the most unbelievable story I've ever heard. Who the heck is Slender Man?
This is an insane story from beginning to end. It all starts with a fictional character called Slenderman and two 12-year-old girls who believed he was real. 12-year-old Peyton Leitner from Wisconsin had a good home and family life. Her parents could not have known that when they agreed to let their little girl go to a sleepover with two other 12-year-olds, that their daughter would almost not come back alive.
It was just sort of a hard story for everyone to get their head around.
These are the girls who young Peyton went to sleep over with. Their names are Anissa Wire and Morgan Geezer. Peyton had been to sleepovers plenty of times before, but she was particularly excited about this one, as her father recalled.
This was just her best friend's birthday party.
Another Friday night.
But this was, a party that was going to celebrate, her best friend, and they were talking about it for weeks.
Peyton was a kind soul who loved everyone, especially her friends.
Go back 5 years ago to 12-year-old Peyton. How would you describe her?
Hopeful, positive, an animal lover. I saw the good in people.
Morgan and Peyton had been friends since they were very small. In fact, part of the reason why they were friends was because Peyton had noticed that Morgan didn't seem to have many friends, so she made the point to reach out. That's the kind of person Peyton was. The kind of person who was always looking out for others.
I made friends with her when I saw that she didn't have any friends at all. Because I didn't want her to be alone.
Morgan recognized what Peyton had done for her, but that didn't stop her from the horrors she would later do to her.
She was my only friend for a long time because...
Why would you hurt your only friend?
It was necessary.
And then there was Anissa. She was new to school that year, and she first became friends with Morgan, and then the three of them all started hanging out together. The day of the sleepover was a Friday, and it started out by them going to Skateland together. At first, everyone was having fun.
I've always been pretty good at roller skating, so I was going around doing my own thing.
Peyton had no idea that the two people she called friends were actively planning to carry out her murder. What she thought was just a lighthearted sleepover was all an elaborate setup that would lead to a brutal and horrifying attack. Peyton's mother recalled that her daughter had brought her American Girl doll to the sleepover with her. She assumed her daughter and her friends would have an innocent night playing with dolls or something similar.
I think back to when I was 12, I played Barbies at sleepovers. So that's what I expected to be happening, playing with dolls and spending some time on the internet.
What was actually going to happen was well beyond anything she could have ever imagined. Morgan's mom also expected it to just be a normal, casual night. Three little girls playing together, and for a while, that's what it was.
They played up in Morgan's bedroom, ran up and down the stairs, giggling and laughing, and it was just a normal night.
The morning came, and Morgan and Anissa had not yet carried out their horrific plan.
I wanted to give her at least one more morning.
The girls woke up, had breakfast, played some games. Then Morgan suggested that they all go to the park.
We're going to do it today at the park. That's what Morgan said.
Because she was so young, Morgan's mom would typically never let her go to the park without an adult.
And they asked if they could go to the park. And I didn't think anything of it. I said, yeah, of course you can go to the park. And, Morgan said goodbye and told me she loved me.
But Morgan had pleaded with her, and because it was her birthday, her mom decided to allow all three girls to go together.
And then we said that we were going to play hide and seek. It happened really fast. I was thinking, dear God, this is really happening.
How could these two little girls, not even teenagers yet, look so innocent and yet be able to do the unthinkable? All the while, Peyton still had no inkling that anything could be wrong. Dan Klein, an officer for the Waukesha County Police Department, recalled Saturday, May 31st as starting out like any normal day.
Saturday, May 31st, 2014. It was one of our first nice weather days that we've had on a Saturday. Sunny, 72 degrees.
It had started off as lighthearted when he stopped by the video store after being told that someone had vandalized the sign by switching around the letters to make it say something suggestive. He hoped it would continue to be a calm day with no major drama. It turned out to be just the opposite when he heard some very unsettling news.
Just as I was trying to take my phone out, over my radio, I heard that a 12-year-old girl had been about 1.5 miles away from this location.
The 911 call is enough to send a shiver down your spine.
911, I'm transferring over a caller on Big Bend. Came upon a 12-year-old female. She appears to be what? Correct.
When different members of law enforcement were alerted of the situation, they didn't believe it at first. Surely she'd fallen off a bike or injured herself in some way. How could someone stab a 12-year-old? Unfortunately, the news was true. Greg Steinberg was the man who found Peyton. He rode his bicycle all the time on Saturdays, but on this particular day, he happened to take a slightly different route. Had he not, he would not have found Peyton.
I quick got out my cell phone, I was shaking, and dialed 911, and I just stayed with the 911.
She was right here in the grass.
Exactly.
Greg, incredibly disturbed, saw that Peyton was covered in but he had no idea what happened to her, or how many times she had been. There was little he could do to help her.
Okay, sir, are you with her right now?
Yes.
Is she awake?
She's awake.
Is there any bleeding going on?
Her clothing has got on it.
Greg offered Peyton some water, but that was all he could do as he waited desperately for the ambulance to arrive. Meanwhile, Peyton was telling him that she was struggling to breathe. When Officer Dan arrived at the scene, he could tell that Peyton wasn't moving much, but she could still answer. The first thing he asked her was if she was okay. She told him no.
And as I got closer, I started to see a little bit more blood. And the closer I got, the more blood I saw.
Somehow she'd been able to pull herself out of those woods. And in another moment of strength, she was able to communicate with him.
I asked her who did this, and she told me her friend Morgan.
Despite her serious injuries and how much she had already suffered, Peyton was still able to explain to Officer Dan what had happened to her. Morgan had led her into the woods and then her. When Peyton's parents were notified and told what happened, they didn't believe it. They were sure that someone must have gotten the details wrong.
Morgan is 12. Morgan didn't do this, is what's going through my head. There's no way.
Police arrived at Morgan's house to try to piece together what happened. As you can imagine, this was shocking to her mother.
Not only were there police in my living room, but they were wearing riot gear.
What would have compelled a young girl to do this to an innocent person, much less a friend of hers? It's hard to wrap your head around it. Paramedics arrived at the scene and were astonished by what they were seeing. In order to get a sense of her injuries, they had to remove her clothing by cutting it off. When she was in the ambulance, she was able to tell them that she had been stabbed by a knife, and she described how long the knife was. This helped them understand just how severe her injuries really were.
I was waiting in the ER, and Peyton was brought in by stretcher. The look on her face is something that I will never forget. She looked like she was in an extreme amount of pain.
The pressure was on to save Peyton's life. She was in bad shape. It was clear she had been stabbed multiple times in her chest and abdomen, an arm, and a leg. Her blood pressure was dangerously low, and her heart was working as hard as it could to keep her alive. While doctors worked desperately to save her, law enforcement asked her to confirm once more that it was Morgan who did it to her. If she did die, as it certainly looked like she would, then they needed to be sure they had the right person. Peyton confirmed that it was Morgan and that there had also been another girl present at the time. When the police arrived at Peyton's house and her mother answered the door, she instantly knew that someone she loved was in grave danger. That was the only reason that she could think of why there would be a detective knocking on her door.
She was very calm. very collected. She knew that something was going on. I don't think she knew exactly to what extent it was.
They said, "Is Peyton home?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Was she at a sleepover last night?" And I said, "Yeah, she was."
Law enforcement explained to Peyton's mother that while the little girl was still alive, she was in grave condition. They told her that she needed to arrange for someone to watch her other child because she needed to come to the hospital right away. She rushed to the hospital immediately and managed to get there before Peyton was sent in for emergency surgery.
I walked into the trauma room that she was in, and she was pale as a ghost. She was terrified. She was crying. She couldn't breathe. And all I hear is, "There's 5 on her arm. There's 7 on her leg." And I'm thinking, 7? What? And one of the nurses says, "All right, I count 19." And then the second nurse said, "I count 19 as well."
That's when it hit her. Peyton had been 19 different times. The nurses were searching over her entire body to make sure they hadn't missed any of her wounds. Peyton's mother comforted her and assured her that she would be all right, but deep down she knew how serious the situation really was. Who manages to survive 19 wounds? Especially such a young girl. The surgeon stated that it was almost a miracle Peyton was alive at all. In fact, had the wounds to her chest been even a millimeter deeper, she would likely be dead. Meanwhile, Morgan's mother is being questioned about her daughter's whereabouts.
They asked me, "Where's Morgan?" I said, "She's at the park with her friends."
Morgan's mom tells the police that Morgan, Peyton, and Anissa had gone to the park together that morning and that she hadn't heard from them since. The police combed through the house. All the while, Morgan's mother begged them to tell her what had happened.
And they wouldn't tell me other than to say there had been an incident at the park and one of the girls was hurt.
When they asked her about the type of kid Morgan was, it was clear that her mother thought she was just a normal little girl who had been celebrating her birthday with her friends.
She was a good kid, and she thought that this was totally out of character for Morgan to be involved in anything like this.
Now that the police knew there was another girl involved, they began to search for her. They were able to get in contact with her father.
Bill, my ex-husband, called me and told me to get to the condo as soon as possible. The police are there looking for Anissa.
The police searched Anissa's house, but there was no sign of her or Morgan. The 2 girls were still at large, and they were the top suspects in Peyton's attack. They needed to be found right away. They were believed to be out in the woods somewhere, but no one could be sure where.
Where's my daughter? That's the only thought I had in my head. I looked at her cell phone, checked all of her text messages, trying to figure out the people that she called and contacted last.
What Anissa's mom would find on her daughter's phone was particularly disturbing. They were goodbye notes.
"This is my final wish to those who care. Do not grieve my absence, but remember me for who I was. I love and cherish you all and wouldn't do you any harm."
She immediately realized that her daughter was likely in extreme danger and called the police. The police believed there was a good chance they would find the 2 girls dead, possibly after taking their own lives. The news of this spread quickly throughout the community, disturbing many and causing everyone to wonder how this could have happened.
Breaking news, a 12-year-old girl is stabbed, leading to a big police search in Waukesha.
There was a major police presence at the site of the location where Peyton had been found, and the media were beginning to flock there too.
Police are still investigating. They still have this neighborhood shut down.
We had just an overwhelming police presence throughout the community. There was squad cars zooming everywhere.
There were helicopters overhead and K-9 units on foot, searching for any sign of the girls.
My daughter was supposed to be at a slumber party, and now she's missing.
The media didn't know what to make of the situation. It was unlike any story the community had ever experienced before. What kind of 12-year-old girl does this to another 12-year-old girl? There was no known motive. Meanwhile, Morgan and Anissa's parents were left wondering how the girls they knew could have gotten wrapped up in something like this.
Morgan was a very happy child. She was intensely creative. She was always making up songs and stories.
Could there have been more going on they weren't aware of?
Looking back, Anissa was never really invited to a lot of birthday parties or anything. I don't think she really made friends that easy.
But Anissa wasn't the only one who struggled socially. Morgan was also often bullied.
In the last year, she started to become moodier and a little bit more reclusive.
Police finally found the two girls on the side of a highway. They had been walking for 5 hours. They were picked up and taken to the police station. At this point, Peyton was not out of surgery yet. It was possible she wouldn't pull through, and this would turn into a murder investigation. Despite knowing this, Morgan and Anissa seemed very calm.
I don't know the last time I have seen two 12-year-old girls in separate interrogation rooms about to describe in excruciating detail what it is that played out in the woods.
Investigators quickly noticed that Anissa had a stain on her shirt. Anissa seemed to be scared, but not Morgan. Not so much.
Morgan, what I'd like to do on this photo of your cheek, okay, is that alright?
Okay.
Alright, cool, thank you.
She was even singing and dancing.
Morgan seemed like she was very calm, very relaxed. I mean, she's at a police department and she's covered in blood. And this is like a normal day for her.
She remained calm as the police took photos of her, some of which showed stains. During questioning, Morgan referred to Peyton as Bella. This was a nickname they used because there was another girl they knew named Bella.
Do you know what happened to Bella? Is she dead?
I don't know. She was taken to the hospital.
What? I was just wondering.
Even though the girls were only 12, they were interrogated without their parents in the room. This is legal in the state of Wisconsin. This is often done because children are often more truthful when their parents aren't in the room. This proved to be true in this case.
What were you trying to do with her when you her?
Kill her. I might as well just say it. We were trying to kill her.
So why did you pick Peyton?
I didn't pick her.
Who picked her?
Whoever Anissa was talking about. She made it seem necessary.
And the person that Anissa was talking about would turn out to be Slender Man.
There's this website full of horror stories that there's one of them called Slenderman.
Morgan seemed to be slowly putting together just how much trouble she was in, and yet still she seemed calm.
This is going to get me arrested, isn't it?
Slowly, it begins to unravel what the girls were possibly thinking when all of this happened.
Anissa told me we had to.
Why?
Because she said that he'd kill our families.
Who's he?
A man. I didn't know him, but Anissa knew him.
The girls truly believed not only that Slender Man was real, but that he had real powers over them. At the time, Slender Man had become some type of online phenomenon that children were obsessed with. It all started with some creepy black and white photographs showing a tall, faceless figure showing up in the background. This led to a lot of folklore, and before long, an entire story had been created. The story associated with the legend was that this figure was associated with missing children.
Who's Slender Man?
He's this tall, faceless man who preys on children. He could be anywhere from 6 feet to 14 feet tall. He's a tall guy who constantly wears a suit. He doesn't have a face. His skin is white.
These girls had fallen down the Slender Man rabbit hole and could no longer tell the difference between what was reality and what wasn't.
I actually thought that he was real because I saw him. We were talking on the bus. I look out the window and I see this supposed thing standing like this with tendrils, looks exactly like a tree. They're gone like that.
Morgan and Anissa said that they believed that in order to prove themselves worthy to this evil creature, they were required to kill someone.
Morgan said, "You have to kill Bella."
After they believed they had killed Peyton, the two girls set off on foot in hopes of meeting up with Slender Man personally.
Morgan found out that Slender has this big mansion in the middle of Nicolet National Park.
As police began to dig deeper, they discovered the bond that Morgan and Anissa had. A bond that was perhaps developed out of loneliness and isolation.
We're so close, we're like sisters.
Anissa appeared to be jealous of the fact that while Morgan was her only friend, she wasn't Morgan's. Morgan still had Peyton.
She was always cruel to me. I feel like she was jealous that Morgan was friends with me and her.
As Morgan and Anissa grew closer, it seemed that Morgan became more and more willing to do whatever she said.
I didn't really understand what we were doing, but I really didn't want to make Anissa mad. It's hard enough to make friends. I don't want to lose them over something like this.
These girls were clearly out of their mind, but did they feel sorry for what they did? And were they mentally capable of being held accountable for their actions?
I figured that I'd get in trouble eventually, though, because Mommy always says that whatever you do catches up to you eventually. And it did.
And that it did. Morgan was charged with first-degree homicide and Anissa was charged with second-degree homicide. However, they were both found not guilty by a jury due to mental health problems. They were both committed to mental health institutions. Anissa has since been released. Prior to her release, she wrote a lengthy letter in court asking for forgiveness. But what of Peyton? She ended up making a remarkable recovery. Here, you can see her thrive in one of the places that helped her heal the most from this whole ordeal, an animal shelter.
Do you feel like your daughter's been stolen from you?
For the time being.
We'll get her back.
Yep.
Investigators were tipped off about the possible remains buried in the back of this house here behind.
Brooke Skylar Richardson had a promising future. The prosecutor says she gave birth in the family home and then her baby.
Skylar Richardson was just a teenager when she became pregnant and decided to hide it from everyone. Nobody knew of her pregnancy, not even her parents. This is because she hid it very well, even from her own parents.
Here's her track photo. This was track season in April, and you can't tell.
On the outside, Skylar seemed to have the perfect life, but on the inside, she struggled with many issues, one of which was a crippling eating disorder.
12 years old, she wouldn't buy gum because it had 5 calories. I didn't even know gum had calories.
Because Skylar was so small, she made an excellent flyer for her school's cheering team. She felt she needed to always be skinny. The way that Skylar kept so small was through forcing herself to throw up. She refused to speak about her weight to anyone that was concerned. It didn't matter how skinny she was, Skylar always wanted to be thinner. In 2017, Skylar began dating a new guy named Brandon. The relationship seemed to be healthy, and finally, she seemed to be gaining weight. She was happy.
We were actually pleased that she was finally gaining some weight.
She looked healthy.
Skylar would end up wearing this form-fitting prom dress, and nobody even thought she could have been pregnant. But Skylar's mother also knew that due to her daughter's relationship with her boyfriend, Brandon, certain things were bound to occur. This is why she insisted that the teen be put on birth control. She even drove her to her appointment. When Skylar came back out, she was in tears. This was because she had just been told she was 8 months pregnant. She chose to go to the prom and not tell anyone what she had found out. Not long after, the police showed up at her home.
And they said, hey, we just need to talk to your daughter about something she may have witnessed. She's not in any trouble, we just need to talk to her.
When the police first called Skylar in for questioning, her parents had no clue as to why. They would soon find out that a patient of a local OBGYN office had told doctors that she had given birth, but then buried the child in the backyard.
You went back to that doctor's office?
And I told her what had happened. That I had to have a baby, and it wasn't alive.
This is a deeply personal moment when Skylar's family finally gets to hug and kiss her.
I'm so sorry, Mommy. I'm sorry.
You should have just told us.
Eventually, police would discover that everything was true. The murder really happened. Skylar may have been allowed to go back home, but she was hardly off the hook. The entire community knew what she had done, and everyone was staring at her and her family. Not to mention, the police knew more than she had been willing to divulge. This was because they had found the remains of Skylar's infant in her parents' backyard, and it appeared that the child's bones had been burned.
There's some evidence to show that there was some burning on her.
And yet Skylar denied over and over again that she ever did anything with fire to her baby. But eventually she changed her story.
Did you hear anything like little gurgle sounds?
As Skylar's walls came down, she began to reveal that her daughter was alive for a short time before she buried her outside. Skylar was distraught as she was arrested at the end of that interrogation for reckless homicide. Finally, she admitted what she did.
I tried to cremate the baby just a little.
You tried to cremate the baby?
Yeah, that's if I did it.
Things soon began to look a lot worse and worse for her, as she was also charged with child endangerment and involuntary manslaughter. Not to mention that Skylar and her family were heavily hated by the community. They appeared to be so obsessed with appearances, so much so that Skylar would be willing to and her own child rather than be a teenage mom. Their lives had turned into an absolute nightmare as they tried their best to defend their daughter. Despite everything, there was nothing that Skylar's parents wouldn't do in order to defend her, even paying her whopping $500,000 bail. In 2019, Skylar would finally face sentencing. She appeared in a pink sweater and gray pants. Her long blonde hair was worn down and looked very thin. What was to become of her future?
All right, ma'am, has the jury reached a verdict in the case?
We have.
We, the jury, in the above captioned case, do hereby find the defendant, Brooke Skylar Richardson, not guilty of the offense of involuntary manslaughter. Count 3, child endangerment. We, the jury, find the defendant, Brooke Skylar Richardson, not guilty of child endangerment.
Skylar shook and cried as she was found not guilty of all of her other charges, except for the abuse of corpse. She was ultimately sentenced to 3 years of community control. Today, she is in the process of rebuilding her life alongside her parents.
Go to jail for the rest of your life. I'm looking in the eyes of a stone cold killer. There's no remorse.
Nicholas Browning appeared to be just a normal kid. He was born to a lawyer and a homemaker, both of whom were sure he was well taken care of. He did well in school and was even involved with the Boy Scouts. His family was very well off.
They lived in a big house that John had helped design.
Still, this did not change how he would later conduct his life. On February 1st of 2008, Nicholas went to spend the night with a friend. He was just a week away from turning 16 years old. When he returned home, he was greeted with a horrific sight. His entire family had been murdered. Initially, police believed this to be a burglary gone wrong. They believed that a stranger had broken in and done this. But because Nicholas was the only surviving family member, he was taken in for questioning. They immediately noticed how calm and unbothered he seemed. What he didn't yet know was that the police had searched the house, and they found the key to the family gun safe hidden under Nicholas's mattress. He was now a suspect in the case. He doesn't make himself look any better when he begins discussing an inheritance he was supposedly supposed to get.
I have a very large, or had whatever, inheritance coming to me, regardless if there's insurance money involved or not.
And just like that, a motive has been established. But that's not all. Nicholas thought he had a good alibi for the night of the murder, since he had been at a sleepover. But when the police talked to the boys he had been with, they said he disappeared. Nick tells the police that he had a good relationship with his family and no ill will toward them.
You know, yes, they're harsh, but they're not that harsh really. And they let me do what I want. There's no reason for me to kill my family.
Eventually, as Nick seems to realize there's no way he can talk himself out of this situation, he ends up confessing to the murders of his entire family. He talks casually and seems to have very little remorse.
I wouldn't between, but if they come up to his head and pull it back down, can we realize I couldn't just walk away from that? shot parole.
What's your brother's name?
Shot crack. I think I shot him twice.
As you can imagine, the case shocked the nation. Who could do this to their own family?
16-year-old Nick Browning Jr. wept as a prosecutor read chilling details of how he murdered his parents and his 2 younger brothers as they slept.
Nick was charged with 4 counts of murder.
Browning pleaded guilty to 4 counts of murder in exchange for parole, following 2 consecutive life prison terms.
He is now 30 years old and remains behind bars. However, he will be eligible for parole in 2031.